It all begins with just another ordinary day when Ju-yeon strides toward school, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he struggles under the burden of his 32 kilograms monster-sized bag, sweat drips from his face and exhaustion sets in. Tensions rise when two students, noticing his struggle, step in, not to help, but to mock him. Pretending to offer assistance, they tease him, claiming they will return his bag soon. Ju-yeon, clutching the straps like a mother protecting her child. However, fear grips him. When he refused their help, they snatched it away forcefully, using the moment to bully him. Fear crept over him as he realized his bag was gone. His mind spiraled, overwhelmed by countless floating screens surrounding him. Ever since a major accident in his childhood, he has been plagued by a flood of internet information appearing before his eyes. Unwanted voices mix in his ears, their words burrowing deep into his mind, overwhelming him. His stomach churns, and his head feels as if it's about to explode. Finally, the boy drops his bag in front of him, groaning about its ridiculous weight. He exhales deeply, as if he just survived a near-death experience. If he ever lost this bag, coming back to school would be a lost cause. After all, this wasn't just a school bag, it was a walking deadweight, a signal-blocking shield on his back. In the classroom, Ju-yeon sat quietly at his desk, his heavy backpack slumped beside him. Lost in his playlist, he drowned out the world until Jisoo appeared, waving in front of him and offering a snack. She thanked him for his feedback on her thumbnail, mentioning that she had updated it as per his suggestions, and now her views were skyrocketing. However, as she glanced at her phone screen in front of him, confusion set in. Her internet had suddenly gone down. Just moments ago, everything was running smoothly, but now, nothing would load. Meanwhile, he shifted uncomfortably, feeling the ache in his back from carrying his heavy backpack. She continued chatting, casually praising him, making him realize that maybe he did watch a lot of YouTube after all. There wasn't much else to do. Before leaving, she invited him to join the broadcast club, calling it the romance of school life. For a self-proclaimed bum like him, romance was an unfamiliar concept, something distant yet intriguing. As he checked his own internet connection and saw an error message, he made up his mind. It was time to go to a place that suited him better. At the demolition site, Ju-yeon sat inside the excavator, finally able to set his heavy bag aside. The loud noise of the machinery drowned out the overwhelming flood of internet information, allowing him a rare moment of peace. Here, strange voices barely reached him. It was only during demolition that he felt normal. If only someone could overhaul his mind completely, he thought. Meanwhile, the other workers relaxed, sipping their canned drinks as they watched him work. Seeing such a young boy operating the excavator with such skill left them surprised. One of them even mused that if Ju-yeon weren't in school, he'd hire him on the spot. As he operated the excavator, Ju-yeon reflected on why he had chosen this job. The high hourly wage was certainly a factor, but more importantly, it allowed him to test his unusual ability. His power wasn't just about seeing or hearing internet data, he could actually use it. In simple terms, instead of watching a YouTube video, if he focused hard enough, he could download and replicate whatever he saw. Of course, for now, this skill was limited to excavator operation. As the sun set, he received his payment from the site captain for the day's hard work. Bowing his head in gratitude, he accepted it. However, the captain then asked about his schooling. Caught off guard, Ju-yeon hesitated before admitting that he was planning to drop out soon. The captain was surprised but listened as Ju-yeon explained he thinks smashing concrete is more valuable than using his brain. The captain didn't quite agree. School life couldn't be torn down as easily as a building. He advised Ju-yeon not to make hasty decisions. Just then, a strange smell filled the air. Before anyone could react, they turned to see a building engulfed in flames. The captain immediately whistled, signaling the workers. He ordered someone to fetch a fire extinguisher from their office and another to call the fire station. Meanwhile, Ju-yeon stood frozen, staring at the burning structure. Something about the fire felt off. The building was supposed to be empty, but suddenly he saw a shadow moving near a window. Realizing that someone was inside, he made a split-second decision. He ran to the captain, urgently requesting the excavator keys. His seriousness startled the captain, but he handed them over. Screams for help echoed from the windows as more people gathered, panicked and calling emergency services. In the midst of the chaos, Ju-yeon, now operating the excavator, carefully approached the burning building. But something seemed strange. If one looked closely, they would notice that the excavator's shovel wasn't in its original state, it was flipped. The captain, observing from the side, suddenly realized what Ju-yeon had done. He had adjusted the shovel's position, preparing for something risky. Ju-yeon then climbed onto the excavator's arm, calling the captain over to assist. Following Ju-yeon's lead, the captain helped lift him up, bringing him closer to the window. Inside, Ju-yeon saw a terrified mother clutching a baby. At that moment, a painful memory struck him, a tragic accident from his past. He recalled a devastating car crash, vehicles engulfed in flames, his injured mother desperately trying to protect him. He had cried, refusing to leave her side, but then a man had grabbed him, pushing him away just before the car exploded. The vision overwhelmed him, his head throbbed, his body trembled atop the excavator's arm. Snapping back to reality, he forced himself to focus. He couldn't let anyone else die in front of him. The baby's cries fueled his resolve, and despite the danger, he leaped into the burning building. The captain shouted in concern, and the onlookers gasped in fear as the flames intensified. Ju-yeon acted quickly. He helped the mother onto the shovel first. She hesitated, worried about her baby, but he assured her before gently placing the infant in her arms. She hugged the child tightly. As Ju-yeon perched on the windowsill, ready to leap to safety, the captain commended his bravery, urging him to move quickly. A wave of triumph washed over him. He had just pulled off a daring rescue, saving 2 lives. But just as he was about to leap, a sudden burst of flames threw him off balance. He slipped, his body lurching forward, and before he could react, he was falling. Instinctively, he grabbed onto the edge, but the weakened structure gave way. Cracks spread rapidly along the wall, and in the next instant, he plunged downward. As Ju-yeon plummeted toward the ground, a storm of thoughts raced through his mind. This was how his life was going to end. All he had ever wanted was a normal life, yet here he was, falling helplessly. A strange sense of confusion clouded his mind, as if he was already dead or trapped in some kind of dream. Before he could grasp what was happening, his surroundings shifted. He was no longer falling but floating in an endless void. A bright light pierced through the darkness, forcing him to squint. Suddenly, a screen materialized before him, playing a video, his own story unfolding on display. A surge of anger welled up inside him. Someone was behind this, but for what reason? Then, an unfamiliar voice echoed from the screen. A strange man appeared, mocking him with a smug expression. The more Ju-yeon tried to make sense of the situation, the more the voice taunted him, irritating him to no end. His head pounded as confusion and frustration overwhelmed him. And then, his brain materialized right before his eyes. Ju-yeon clutched his head tightly as unbearable pain surged through him. The voice from the brain spoke in a condescending tone, stating that it had encountered countless humans before, but had never seen such a dull-witted one like him. A person with the power to change the world, yet all he did was demolish old, crumbling buildings, remarking stupid. The pain intensified as Ju-yeon fell to his knees, his entire being trembling under the weight of the words, cursing his own brain. But the voice remained unfazed, musing aloud whether he would break under the pressure or finally step forward. Without waiting for an answer, it declared that it would share its strength with him. Then, the entity introduced itself as Stream, the last seed of Yggdrasil. A bolt of lightning struck Ju-yeon in an instant, flooding his body with an overwhelming force. And then, everything went black. Later, Ju-yeon was discovered by the rescue team. Miraculously, despite everything he had experienced, he woke up completely unharmed. Even the doctors, after a thorough checkup, found no injuries and discharged him. It was as if nothing had happened at all. As he walked to school the next day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His ability had changed. Before, he could only hear data and voices, but now he could see them. Ever since waking up in the hospital, floating videos had begun appearing in front of him, playing everyone's favorite YouTube clips. However, he chose to ignore them, refusing to let curiosity get the best of him. Back in the classroom, his routine resumed as usual. He reached his desk, his heavy bag weighing him down, and sighed in frustration. Dropping his head onto the desk, he tried to catch his breath. Just then, the first period bell rang, and the teacher entered the room. The students straightened in their seats as the teacher made an announcement. The teacher announced the arrival of a new student, Min Seo, and instructed the class to welcome her. As she stepped into the room, a murmur spread among the students. A boy sitting near Ju-yeon nudged him, clearly starstruck, awed by her presence. But Ju-yeon wasn't focused on her appearance. His eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, a floating video player appeared displaying a glaring access denied message. His heart pounded. This had never happened before. As if sensing his gaze, Min Seo glanced in his direction, and an unexplainable nervousness settled over Ju-yeon. As Ju-yeon sat in class, he couldn't shake the realization that while everyone else mindlessly scrolled through YouTube, watching videos of their own interest, he saw something entirely different. He could automatically see the videos that represented people's interests. With just a glance, he could learn about anyone through the videos floating around them like eerie holograms. But something about her was different. Min Seo's video player was still locked, displaying the same access denied message. Unlike the others, he couldn't see anything about her. That alone made him uneasy. Meanwhile, the teacher asked Seo to introduce herself. She hesitated for a moment before admitting that she was a little nervous. Her response surprised the class, and even the teacher looked concerned, wondering what was making her uncomfortable. But then, she quickly dismissed the concern with a shy smile before boldly pointing to her uniform. As it was just uncomfortable to move in, she added, puffing out her chest slightly. The boys in class immediately perked up, intrigued by her confidence, while Ju-yeon remained distracted by the eerie feeling in his gut. Why was she the only one whose videos were locked, he thought. As he continued staring, lost in thought, Seo suddenly turned to glance at him. Their eyes met for a split second. Caught off guard, Ju-yeon snapped his head away so fast it could have been mistaken for an exorcism, while trying to act natural. Once class was dismissed, Ju-yeon stayed at his desk, still trying to process the strange situation. From a distance, he watched resting his chin on his hand. Seo had practically been swallowed by a swarm of excited girls. One girl, fascinated by Seo's blonde hair, reached out to touch it. But Seo immediately stepped back, shaking her head. She told them not to come behind her, saying she was a bit sensitive. Then, as if sensing his gaze, Seo glanced toward him again. At Ju-yeon's desk, Jesu had also taken notice of the new transfer student. She admired Seo's beauty, already imagining how great it would be if she joined the broadcasting club. If she filmed videos with her, it would make Jesu even more popular, she thought. Ju-yeon, still uneasy, commented that Seo seemed a bit weird. Jisoo scoffed at the remark, insisting that she was pretty. Meanwhile, across the room, the girls chatting with Seo pointed toward Ju-yeon. They told her not to bother with him, saying he was a total loner. All he ever did was cling to that weird bag of his, and if someone touched it, he would completely freak out. Hearing this, Seo's eyes narrowed slightly. The story about Ju-yeon's bag had piqued her curiosity. Jesu excitedly showed Ju-yeon a YouTube video she had found. The title read, "High School Student Rescues a Person Using an Excavator." As she expressed, the person in the video looked eerily similar to Ju-yeon. She pointed it out, noting that the video had been uploaded when Ju-yeon was absent from school, supposedly due to an injury. Ju-yeon's mind raced. Who could have filmed this? His immediate suspicion fell on Mr. Kim. But shaking off the thought, he quickly denied any involvement, saying that it could never be him. Jesu nodded in agreement, casually remarking that someone like him, who hated getting involved in other people's affairs, would never do something so heroic. Before Ju-yeon could respond, a voice from behind cut through their conversation, asking if it was really him. As she watched the video too, Ju-yeon stiffened and turned to see Seo standing right behind him, her expression unreadable. His stomach twisted in nervousness. Before he could react, she leaned closer and his breath caught when he felt her hand press firmly against his shoulder, and then with a low voice, asked him how long he planned to keep it hidden. Then, without waiting for a response, she told him to follow her quietly, as he watched her walk out of the classroom with his oversized monster bag. His bag wasn't beside his desk. A cold sweat broke out across his skin. His hands shot to his head in panic, his reaction startling Jesu. Without a second thought, he bolted from the classroom, running through the hallway as fast as he could. His breathing turned ragged, but he didn't stop. As he sprinted past students, their floating video players flickered into view, filling his vision with countless YouTube clips. He tried to ignore them, lowering his head and focusing on the path ahead. Finally, he reached the computer room. His chest heaved as he stood at the doorway, gasping for breath. Seo was there, standing near the window. His bag sat on the windowsill beside her. She turned to him, her expression calm, and referred to his bag as a radio backpack. Ju-yeon's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to ask why she was doing this, but before he could even open his mouth, she spoke again. "From now on, you'll have to carry something much heavier," she said. And with that, she grabbed his bag and threw it out the window. Ju Yon's voice tore through the air as he yelled in pure fear, his body frozen in place, dread crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Outside on the school grounds, boys were playing when a sudden burst of impact caught their attention. Something had crashed onto the floor, smoke rising from it. Fear gripped them as they looked up toward the building, realizing that whatever had fallen had come from above. Back in the computer lab, Ju Yon was kneeling on the floor, gripping his head as Seo stood over him. Her voice was calm yet chilling as she revealed the truth. He had the seed of Yggdrasil in his head. She continued, explaining that the seed, according to its owner's desires, was a source of absolute knowledge. If one wished for power, it became a devastating weapon. If one sought knowledge, it granted limitless insight. If one desired authority, it took the form of a crown. It even provided boundless artistic ability. However, after fulfilling the owner's wishes, it would inevitably consume the very person who used it. Throughout history, every time the world faced catastrophe, the seed had been at the center of it. Ju Yon, still clutching his head, refused to accept it. He argued that such a thing couldn't possibly be inside him. Seo, unbothered by his denial, warned him not to pretend she could see everything. At the realization that she could see through his abilities, something no one else had ever done, he is shocked. Stepping forward, she tilted his chin upward with her fingers, her expression unreadable. Normally, someone like him would be classified as a target for elimination upon discovery, she explained. However, the higher-ups had chosen to give him a chance. Ju Yon was completely puzzled. He couldn't understand what chance she was referring to. Without answering, Seo picked up a CD from the table. Then, with a sharp glance, she snapped it into two jagged pieces. Holding one half like a blade, she charged at him without hesitation. Ju Yon barely had time to react before she slashed at his chest. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, realization sinking in, she wasn't bluffing. Seo clicked her tongue in disappointment. Before he could fully grasp what was happening, she lunged again. This time, her attack cut into his arm, making him groan in pain. As she stepped back, she let out a frustrated sigh. Annoyed by her restrictive uniform, she swiftly removed the outer layer without hesitation, revealing her toned body gym clothes underneath. Ju Yon's breathing grew ragged. The air had shifted. She was getting serious. In a desperate attempt to stop her, he raised his hands and admitted that he had strange abilities. But he insisted that they had nothing to do with fighting or power. The only thing he could do was operate an excavator, nothing more. Seo, unimpressed by his excuses, smirked. She wanted proof. With a sharp glint in her eye, she attacked again. This time, the jagged CD slashed across his cheek. Ju Yon barely dodged in time, stumbling backward, his mind finally registering the terrifying truth. Seo was trying to kill him. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. The only thing she was good at was killing people. As she stepped forward to strike again, Ju Yon's thoughts scrambled in panic. If he didn't act now, he was going to die a very stupid death. Wiping the blood from his cheek, his gaze flickered toward the open door. Running away sounds like a solid life choice right now, he thought. Before he could even make a move, Seo's voice cut through the air like a blade. If he runs, and she catches him, he'll live the rest of his life as a lab rat. His body locked up on instinct. A shiver slithered down his spine, and for a moment, he seriously weighed his options. His voice trembled as he tried to reason with her. He didn't need power, knowledge, or art. He knew nothing. All he wanted was to earn money working as an excavator operator and live a normal life like everyone else. Seo's smirk widened. Repeating the word normal, she scoffed. That's impossible, she said. As long as he had that power, he would always end up wanting more. That was human greed. Ju Yon could only stare at her, confused and terrified all over again. With mounting irritation, Ju Yon finally snapped. His frustration burst out like a dam breaking, his voice cutting through the tense air saying how casually she can speak like this, because of this strange ability. He had been forced to carry his bag like a monster to school every single day. He had never been able to make a proper friend, afraid that he might cause trouble for them. He barely managed to hold down a part-time job, just so he could live normally. Fear twisted into anger, and for the first time, Ju Yon glared at Seo with pure defiance. His voice trembled with rage as he warned her not to touch him. He wouldn't just stand there and take it. If she pushed him any further, he would fight back. The moment those words left his mouth, something changed. Seo's error window shattered. Ju Yon clenched his fists, his entire body shaking. He wanted to intimidate her, to make her step back, to make her understand. But Seo remained unfazed. Instead, she only narrowed her eyes and, with her usual stubbornness, continued to provoke him to show his ability now. Her words only fueled Ju-yeon's fury, but before he could react, something strange happened. Now that her error window had broken, his ability kicked in again. Around him, flickering into existence, were Seo's favorite YouTube videos. And every single one of them was a fight. A chill ran down his spine. There was no time to process it. Seo charged at him again, but this time, he moved. Thinking how dare she swing a knife at an unarmed person, his body reacted instinctively. Instead of retreating, he dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade. And then, without thinking, he countered. Grabbing her by the shoulder, he used her momentum against her. With a quick movement, he lifted her off the ground, and in the next instant, Seo was slammed onto the floor. Ju-yeon felt a strange outrage burning inside him. As he opened his eyes, countless video players flickered around him, flooding his mind with fight videos. These were the same videos he had seen before around Seo. The overwhelming sensation sucked into his consciousness, forcing him to grab his head in confusion. Back in the present, he found himself locked in battle with Seo. Realizing that Ju-yeon had finally shown his true self, she moved in swiftly, grabbing his head and locking his neck with her arm. Ju-yeon shoved her back with force, breaking free. Seo casually admitted she had been moments away from snapping his neck. Stunned, he clutched his throat, realizing she wasn't joking. She had actually meant to kill him. He had to pull himself together. As she advanced with the knife, he forced himself to focus, not on the blade, but on her movements. This time, he managed to block her attack. But Seo only scoffed, making it clear that mere defense wouldn't save him. If he wanted to survive, he had to do more than just block. He had to fight back. Seizing an opening, Ju-yeon grabbed her shoulder and forcefully brought her upper body down, thrusting his knee upward in a decisive counterattack. At that moment, he realized he could actually use Krav Maga. Believing he had finally ended the fight, he steadied himself as Seo bowed slightly, seemingly acknowledging his skill. But just as he thought it was over, she lunged at him with a devilish smile. Completely off guard, he stumbled as she swept his leg, sending him crashing to the floor like a sack of regrets. And as if that humiliation wasn't enough, she immediately went for a brutal stomp to his head. He barely managed to shift away, dodging by mere inches. Seo then grabbed a wire from the surroundings, standing in front of him as he lay sprawled on the floor, looking more like a discarded ragdoll than a fighter. Wrapping the wire around her hand with an eerie calm, she scoffed, remarking that if he was planning to give up now, he might as well save her the trouble and drop dead. Moving toward him, she set a trap, making it clear that this pathetic struggle of his would end in the most unpleasant way possible. Ju-yeon's mind raced. He imagined the wire tightening around his neck, his vision going dark. Panic overtook him. At that moment, the only thing he could recall was playing chase tag as a child. His instincts screamed at him to do the one thing he had mastered since childhood, run like hell. Zoning back into reality, he bolted out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of the near-destroyed lab. Seo watched him flee, deciding that if he was caught, he would die. Ju-yeon tore through the lobby at full speed, shoving past stunned students who barely had time to react. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but stopping wasn't an option. His only mission was to escape that lunatic before she turned him into a cautionary tale. As he paused mid-sprint to catch his breath, relief washed over him. He had lost her. But that relief was short-lived. A terrifying presence loomed behind him. Turning back, he saw Seo charging at him like a ferocious lion. His heart nearly stopped. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the stairs. Seo's voice rang in his ears, reminding him that she had warned him not to escape. If he didn't want to live like a lab rat, running wasn't enough. He needed a real plan. Still sprinting up the stairs, he tried searching his mind for any useful information. But this time, all the videos where blank fear had completely hijacked the controls. Reaching a door, he rushed inside and immediately locked it behind him, gasping for breath. For a brief moment, he felt safe. But as he turned around, his stomach dropped. He wasn't alone. 3 guys were inside, smoking. They sneered at him, eyes sharp with amusement. For the first time in his life, Bullies had never been this welcome. With tears in his eyes, he apologized. As the boys tried to intimidate Ju-yeon, bombarding him with questions, he dropped to his knees in front of them. His eyes fixated on them, not out of fear, but because his system was displaying their favorite YouTube videos. One of the boys, the one with the strange haircut, caught him staring and immediately snapped, warning him not to if he valued his life. Before anyone could react, the door suddenly burst open. Seo entered, her foot slamming against the door. The sudden impact startled the boys, making them flinch. As she stepped forward, her alluring, toned physique came into view, instantly catching the eye of the strange-haired boy. Stepping closer, he spoke in a confident tone, warning her that this place was dangerous for a kid like her. The next moment, his words were cut off. Seo's foot struck his chin with brutal force, sending him crashing to the ground. Without hesitation, she moved toward the remaining two, her presence alone making them freeze. Ju-yeon, on the other hand, was paralyzed with fear. Furious at how she had suddenly appeared and started attacking, the two bullies lunged at her. But in mere moments, they were both slammed to the ground, left in the dust. Seo then turned to Ju-yeon, her expression cold as she reminded him that she had told him not to run. With an icy glare, she mocked him, questioning if he was actually dumb enough to believe these thugs would be his saviors. Ju-yeon, trying to keep his composure, pretended to brush it off. In reality, he had only been buying time, hoping to access his brain system. Keeping up the act, he suddenly changed his tone, saying that before he died, he wanted to thank her one last time. The longer he spoke, the more he realized, after meeting a girl who was actually trying to kill him, he desperately wanted to live. Glancing into the system, he found fighting videos and immediately tried downloading them into his mind. But the flood of information was overwhelming, causing a sharp, unbearable pain in his head. He clutched his head tightly, groaning in agony. Seo observed him, remarking that his head looked ready to explode all on its own, without any help from her. Then, with an icy reassurance, she added that he didn't need to worry, she would make it quick. With those final words, she lunged at him, declaring that this was his grand finale. To Seo's shock, Ju-yeon counterattacked, striking at her face with his leg. She barely managed to block it with both arms, but the sheer force sent her skidding backward. Ju-yeon wasted no time, immediately launching another attack, unleashing a relentless flurry of punches. Yet, Seo dodged every single one with infuriating ease, as if she were merely entertaining herself. Seeing an opening, she caught his fist mid-swing and forcefully grabbed his neck, slamming him into the ground with all her strength. Ju-yeon lay there, battered and struggling, while Seo towered over him. She scoffed, mocking him, stating that his strength, willpower, and senses were the worst. Deeming him unworthy as a vessel, she planted her foot on his neck with a cruel smirk, pressing down as if she were about to stomp out a mere insect. Ju-yeon, still clueless about her true intentions, gasped for air. Seo, growing impatient, demanded that he spit out the seed of Yggdrasil. But Ju-yeon, in his weakened state, could only manage to express his desire to live a normal life like everyone else. Suddenly, a fierce emotion ignited within him, rage, raw and unrelenting, twisting into something even darker. Meanwhile, inside the classroom, the power shuts off entirely. Jesu, glancing at her phone, noticed something strange. Even the smartphones had stopped working. Back on the rooftop, Ju-yeon remained pinned beneath Seo's foot. But something had changed. A force deep within him had awakened. Without warning, he lashed out, kicking Seo with a devastating force. She stumbled back, clutching her stomach, sliding across the rooftop. Her eyes widened in shock. The vessel had broken. Ju-yeon stood up, a twisted grin spreading across his face. Raising his hand, he pointed at Seo, and in an instant, the transformer tower behind her erupted into the sky in a massive explosion. A deep, unfamiliar presence had taken over, controlling his body. Amusement flickered in his eyes as he observed Seo, as if toying with her. But Seo was not backing down. She steadied herself and advanced toward him, unfazed by the overwhelming pressure radiating from his presence. Ju-yeon disappeared from sight. In the blink of an eye, he reappeared right in front of Seo, raising a single finger. With a sudden release of energy, he sent her flying backward, as if struck with an invisible force. Seo crashed hard but managed to get back on her feet. Ju-yeon observed her, intrigued by her resilience. Enjoying the battle, he decided to push further. With a single movement, he launched himself into the air and delivered a devastating airborne kick. Seo raised her arms to block, but the sheer impact shattered the rooftop's barriers, sending her tumbling back. She barely managed to grab onto the edge, hanging by one hand, her fingers digging into the concrete to keep from falling. Ju-yeon stood at the rooftop's edge, his eyes glowing ominously, the beastly energy within him fully awakened. Seo struggled to pull herself up, her grip tightening on the crumbling edge. Ju-yeon lifted his leg, preparing to stomp down on her fingers, the final blow hanging in the air. Just as he was about to strike, something within him fought back. His expression twisted in pain as he clenched his fists. Then, with all his strength, he punched himself square in the face. A desperate struggle unfolded within him, the battle against the force that had overtaken his mind, the seed of Yggdrasil. Darkness surrounded him. A void stretched endlessly in all directions as he floated weightlessly through space. The sensation was eerily familiar, just like the time he had fallen through a building, nearly crushed to death. As he struggled to make sense of his surroundings, a massive screen flickered to life in front of him. His own face appeared on the display. A voice called out, mocking him for finally waking up. Recognition dawned on him. It was the seed of Yggdrasil, the entity that had taken control of his body. Fury surged through him as he clenched his fists, demanding to know what it was doing with his body. But the seed guy ignored his anger, directing his attention to another screen. It displayed his body in action, effortlessly wielding immense power. The voice taunted him, urging him to admire the strength he never knew he possessed. Still enraged, Ju-yeon shouted for it to release him immediately. The entity chuckled, amused. If he wanted to escape, he was welcome to try. It even mocked him, playfully telling him to like and subscribe, treating his struggle as nothing more than a game. Ju-yeon's frustration boiled over. He had already endured more than enough, carrying burdens too heavy to bear, struggling without money, without friends. But losing control of his own body was the one thing he refused to accept. Determined, he reeled back his fist and slammed it against the screen before him. The impact sent ripples through the display, but it remained intact. Gritting his teeth, he struck again and again, each punch carrying the full weight of his fury. But no matter how hard he hit, the barrier refused to break. His strength wavered, and for a moment, hopelessness threatened to consume him. But then, another screen appeared, this time resembling a video player. Realization struck. If this place followed the same rules as his system, then his abilities could work here too. Several videos appeared before him, displaying different techniques. His gaze locked onto one in particular, an explosive punch technique. It reminded him of how his earlier attacks had failed against CO. But here, in this space, perhaps things were different. Something deep within him stirred. A primal force awakens. He clenched his fist, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. The fire in his eyes burned brighter as he roared, declaring his intent to reclaim his body. With all his might, he drove his fist forward. The moment his knuckles met the screen, the entire space trembled. Cracks splintered across the barrier, and in an instant, it shattered into countless fragments, engulfing him in a blinding light. Back on the rooftop, CO, still hanging by one hand from the edge, gritted her teeth and pulled herself up with sheer determination. As she climbed back onto the rooftop, her gaze immediately locked onto Ju-yeon, who stood with his back turned to her. Without hesitation, she reached for a loose cable nearby, ready to end this once and for all. But before she could make a move, Ju-yeon suddenly yelled out, his voice echoing across the rooftop. He clutched his head, demanding that the seed guy get out of his mind. CO froze for a moment. She had never heard that name before, nor had she ever encountered someone who regained their sanity after having their body taken over. The realization unsettled her that how had he managed to break free. Meanwhile, Ju-yeon was still locked in a fierce struggle with the entity inside him. His body trembled as he fought to suppress its influence. But the seed guy remained defiant, its voice dripping with amusement. It accused Ju-yeon of being ungrateful, reminding him how happy he had been moments ago. It urged him to accept its presence, claiming that it was the last remaining seed of the great Yggdrasil. Ju-yeon, however, refused to give in. His hands gripped his head tighter as he growled in frustration, demanding that it shut up and leave him alone. CO suddenly approached from behind, gripping a cable in her hand, wrapped it around his neck, attempting to choke him while coldly stating that the test was over and the result was a failure. Struggling against her grip, Ju-yeon tried to reason with her, saying he had finally regained his senses, saying the seed guy within him would do something to his body next. CO, frustrated by the unpredictable nature of the Yggdrasil seed, clenched her jaw, realizing how troublesome this situation had become. With a swift motion, she pulled out her audio device and gave a direct order to the Alpha team. Almost instantly, armed soldiers emerged from the shadows, surrounding Ju-yeon in a tight formation. Stunned, he tried to process what was happening when the team asked CO if they truly intended to kill him. Ju-yeon's frustration boiled over as he demanded answers, but CO remained unfazed. With a firm tone, she declared their decision. Ju-yeon was to be taken to the Scallop's headquarters. As warnings flashed across the system, a man frantically worked to contain the escalating situation. The system flagged an unknown error, its automated voice declaring an emergency. Suddenly, alarms blared, and the main servers surged with power spikes, causing a short circuit. Sparks flew, igniting a fire as the system issued a critical alert, urging all employees to remain calm and follow emergency protocols. The safety department employees rushed to the scene, extinguishers in hand, trying to contain the fire. Amidst the chaos, they reported that all power had been lost. Essential devices, including nanomachines, MRI scanners, and brain monitoring equipment, had all shut down simultaneously. One thing was certain: the source of the disturbance was linked to the seed guy inside Ju-yeon's head. They had been monitoring him closely, and now, faced with an anomaly beyond their control, their concerns deepened. Some murmured about the possibility of a monster residing within him. Meanwhile, Ju-yeon sat bound to a chair in a secured room, his arms restrained against his bindings, as he refuted their accusations that he wasn't a monster, just a high school student. In another section of the facility, an investigator approached the director, holding a stack of documents. As the director flipped through the pages, his expression darkened. The investigator spoke in a low voice, informing him that they had detected dislikes in Ju-yeon's brain. Seo approached the research room, where Ju-yeon's image flickered on the computer screen. Inside Scallop's headquarters, Director Min Do-hoon observed the footage, commenting that she had caught quite a big fish, only to correct himself, saying it was more like an electric eel. His tone carried a mix of amusement and irritation as he turned toward her, questioning why she had acted alone without reporting it. Seo, unfazed, compared the discovery to finding a hidden cafe she wanted to keep to herself. The director sighed, muttering that he could never tell if she was joking or being serious. Putting the conversation aside for the moment, he instructed her to hand over the data. Seo removed her contact lenses and passed them to him. Min Do-hoon inserted the lenses into a VR set and put them on. Within moments, his body tensed. His expression twisted with shock as he removed the VR set abruptly, visibly shaken by what he had just witnessed. Recovering quickly, he remarked that the situation did, indeed, resemble a hidden cafe, something Seo wanted to keep to herself. Seo, leaning back slightly, recalled that when she visited, the coffee was good, but the owner wasn't quite right. Min Do-hoon, intrigued, asked about this owner she was referring to. Seo admitted she wasn't sure, but the other presence that occasionally emerged was someone she never wanted to meet again. He studied her carefully before asking if she was giving up. Seo dismissed the notion, stating that she wasn't particularly skilled at dealing with things that made her uncomfortable. He then inquired about the seed's properties, learning that it grew by consuming desires. However, in Ju-yeon's case, there was no sign of desire left within him. If left alone, the seed might wither away. Seo suggested that if it posed a threat, they could always transplant it. Min Do-hoon leaned back, contemplating for a moment before asking if she knew the difference between a hero and a villain. Without waiting for an answer, he revealed that the difference was education. He pointed out that platforms like YouTube could be both violent and proactive, but with proper guidance, their potential was limitless. As the words settled, something about his explanation seemed to strike a chord with Seo, leaving her momentarily stunned. Meanwhile, Ju-yeon found himself escorted through a dimly lit corridor by two investigators. Anxiety gnawed at him as he feared they were leading him to some gruesome experiment, perhaps even to remove his brain. When he hesitantly asked where they were taking him, one of the investigators bluntly replied that the machine he broke today had an extremely high cost. Reaching a heavily secured door, one of the guards stationed at the entrance received a signal and a confirmation, allowing only Ju-yeon to pass through. As he stepped inside the research room, his eyes immediately locked onto Seo. His rage flared as if she were the mastermind behind every disaster in his life. He glared at her furiously, but before he could act, Min Do-hoon, standing in the center of the room, casually dismissed his hostile stare, advising him not to glare at Seo like that. With an easygoing demeanor, he introduced himself. But in Ju-yeon's mind, none of it mattered. Whoever this man was, just another loudmouth, he needed to release him immediately. Before Ju-yeon could protest, Min Do-hoon approached, securing him tightly to a chair, apologizing for the rough handling, but insisting that there were necessary procedures to follow. And then, he cleared his throat and leaned in slightly, announcing the start of their interview. His first question cut straight to the point: Ju-yeon's father. Ju-yeon remained silent, his expression blank. Min Do-hoon observed him for a moment, recognizing the resistance. He decided to proceed differently. Raising his hand, he formed his fingers into the shape of a gun and called it the Gun of Truth. With a playful yet ominous tone, he assured Ju-yeon that it would sting just a little. Without warning, he fired. A surge of energy shot forward, striking Ju-yeon's body like an invisible force, violently pushing him back. As Min Do-hoon revealed the nature of the Bullet of Truth, he explained that it wouldn't cause harm, it merely unlocked blocked memories for a moment. Without hesitation, he fired it at Ju-yeon. The force of the impact sent Ju-yeon staggering backward, while Min Do-hoon's body trembled as well as he tried to steady his shaking hands. Then, something unfamiliar happened. Ju-yeon's consciousness was pulled away from his body, allowing him to see himself sitting unconscious on the floor, head down as a lifeless body. Before he could process what was happening, he felt something beneath his feet, an invisible force dragging him away. In the next instant, he was falling. As he plummeted through the abyss, he wondered how much further he had to go to uncover the truth. The descent felt endless, and soon, he found himself submerged in water. Memories surged through him, each one so painful it nearly stole his breath away. The realization struck: whatever truth he sought lay buried within these memories. As he tried to recall them, his surroundings shifted. Suddenly, he was inside a strange tube. Relief washed over him, thinking he was safe. But then, his gaze lifted, and he saw something bizarre, a sun-like orb hovering above, glowing ominously with a YouTube logo embedded in its center. Meanwhile, back in the research lab, Ju-yeon's unconscious body remained motionless. Min Do-hoon, however, was in no better condition. His fingers bled from the strain of using such a burdensome technique. As his strength faltered, he collapsed to the ground, struggling to catch his breath. Seo rushed to his side, supporting him as he struggled to stay upright. His condition was worse than expected, sweat dripping from his face. He managed to explain that the technique he had just used required borrowing 10% of South Korea's power supply. Meanwhile, out on the streets, chaos unfolded. A sudden blackout plunged the city into darkness, forcing people to switch on their phone flashlights. Confusion spread as announcements urged citizens to return home immediately, warning them about the unexpected power outage. Back in the lab, Seo stared in disbelief. She hadn't expected the process to require such an immense amount of energy. Min Do-hoon, however, remained focused. He turned his gaze toward Ju-yeon's unconscious body and remarked that whether it was all worth it depended entirely on that guy. Elsewhere, on the shore of an unfamiliar beach, Ju-yeon's consciousness drifted. He stared in amazement at the massive YouTube-like symbol shimmering over the sea. As memories of the recent incidents replayed in his mind, his anger reignited. He furiously blamed the mysterious seed guy responsible for everything, convinced that it had turned his life into a complete mess. Yet, strangely, in this moment, he felt oddly comfortable. Floating on the water, he experienced an unusual sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, he didn't want to move, just to stay there, weightless and free. He reflected on everything that had happened, realizing how much his life had changed. Then fate, who is clearly not a fan of peaceful moments, sent a massive wave surging from the depths, crashing down upon him. Pulled underwater, his thoughts dissolved into darkness once again. Ju-yeon suddenly found himself in a familiar setting, a classroom from his elementary school days. As he looked around, he realized this was a memory from his childhood. His teacher approached with a warm smile, encouraging him to share his vacation story with the class. Excited, he eagerly began recounting his adventures, explaining how he had learned to surf and even ridden a banana boat. He described the experience as fantastic, expecting his classmates to be amazed. But instead of being impressed, they reacted with skepticism. They pointed out that his skin wasn't tanned at all, poking holes in his story with smug amusement. Confused and embarrassed, he struggled to understand why they didn't believe him. Later, as he sat in the back seat of the car on the way home, he remained quiet, still thinking about what had happened at school. The driver, noticing his silence, asked how it felt to meet his friends again after such a long time. Ju-yeon, distracted by a YouTube vlog playing on his phone, hesitated before asking a question that had been bothering him. He asked why skin burns when going to the sea. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror before replying that he had never been to the sea. A sinking feeling settled in Ju-yeon's chest, shaking his head, denying it with sadness. His parents were always busy. Sensing his disappointment, the driver sighed, commenting that no matter how busy someone is, they should take their child to the sea at least once. The driver, as if trying to change the subject, explained that the reason skin tans in the sun is because it sheds a layer like a snake. That comparison made Ju-yeon frown. He questioned whether shedding skin was a good thing. A strange, unsettling smile spread across his face. With a calm and eerie tone, he affirmed that it was good, as one could live with a new body, leaving the past behind. As the driver turned to look at Ju-yeon, a cold shiver ran down Ju-yeon's spine, and what he saw froze him in terror. The man driving the car was no longer the driver. It was the seed of Yggdrasil, grinning at him with hollow, knowing eyes. On the beach, the rain began to fall, gentle at first, but quickly intensifying into a storm. The empty tube floated aimlessly on the surface of the sea, a silent indication that Ju-yeon was still trapped within his memories. Back at the research lab, director Min Do-han casually played music, letting the soft melody fill the tense atmosphere as if he were hosting a tea party instead of dealing with a crisis. Seo, watching him in disbelief, wondering if he was completely oblivious or just too full of himself to care. Min Do-han, unfazed, explained that in moments of disturbance, nothing was more calming than music. He believed that all lullabies carried the same message, to sleep well. His gaze drifted toward Ju-yeon, lying motionless on the couch, before adding an unsettling thought. There was an extra line to that message: sleep well, because the world is hell. His sharp eyes caught the faint tremor in Ju-yeon's fingers. Seo, still skeptical, pointed out that people possessed by the seed had always turned the world into hell. There was no guarantee that Ju-yeon wouldn't do the same. Before Min Do-han could respond, an investigator burst into the room, rushing toward him with a set of documents. Urgently, he requested the director to take a look, looking like he had just uncovered the secret to the universe. As Min Do-han scanned the reports, his expression darkened. They might have gotten it all wrong. The MRI scan revealed it was nothing less than a secret to the universe. There was a chip inside Ju-yeon's brain. Back in the memory, the eerie moment in the car continued. The driver, no longer the same person, turned toward Ju-yeon with a chilling grin. Calling him a mere meat shield, he grabbed Ju-yeon's face, his grip firm and unyielding. Mocking him, he questioned how far he had come just to learn the truth. Ju-yeon, trembling, barely managed to ask who he was. But the seed guy before him only reminded him that this was the beginning of everything. And then, the floodgates of memory burst open. Ju-yeon would never forget the first day of his 5th grade. The day of the accident he never wanted to remember. A bus had appeared out of nowhere and collided with their car. The impact, sudden and violent, sent shockwaves through his mind, pulling him out of the scene and back into the ocean. As he sank deeper into the water, the weight of it all pressed against him. He had been told to seek the truth. But the place he had arrived at was nothing more than a repository of embarrassing, painful memories. Suddenly, Ju-yeon found himself back inside the tube, coughing violently as he struggled to breathe. His body ached from the overwhelming sensation of drowning, and he gasped for air while trying to steady himself. The seed guy's voice echoed in his ears, taunting him. Ju-yeon had always been great at lying, even as a child. Fury burned in Ju-yeon's eyes as he demanded to know where he was and what this place was supposed to be. But the seed guy only appeared on the water's surface, smirking as he basked in Ju-yeon's frustration. Calling him an idiot, he accused Ju-yeon of merely wanting attention. Ju-yeon's patience snapped. He snapped, telling him to get lost like a clueless fool who had already overstayed his welcome. His mind racing with suspicion, had the seed invaded his thoughts during the car accident? Everything he saw was manipulated. But the seed guy only laughed, attempting to provoke him further. Why it happened was far more important than when it happened. Mocking him, he picked his nose before diving into the water, claiming that this body, Ju-yeon's body, was devouring his own desires. Ju-yeon, still on the floating tube, trying to stop him from disappearing, as his story wasn't finished, but it was too late. The seed guy vanished beneath the waves. Cursing under his breath, Ju-yeon clenched his fists. His anger grew, but it was fueled by frustration more than anything else. What truth was he supposed to uncover? His thoughts scrambled. Reminding what he saw on YouTube, his gaze lifted toward the sky, where the sun shined brightly, its shape unmistakably resembling the YouTube logo. And then it hit him. Sun, sunburn, and the past sheds away. The memory resurfaced, sharper than before. Recalling the thoughts of how he woke up after the accident, his heart pounded as realization struck. He never woke up, not for an entire year. Before he could process the shock, another massive wave surged toward him, crashing down with immense force, dragging him beneath the surface once more. And then, the truth unraveled before his eyes. After the accident, the doctors had declared him brain dead. For 90 days, his body remained unresponsive, his mind seemingly lost in the void. As medical professionals debated whether to transfer him to a research facility, a senior doctor requested approval from his legal guardian. And in that moment, the seed of Yggdrasil stepped forward, falsely claiming to be his guardian. With a sly smile, he granted permission for the experiment to begin like a puppeteer pulling the strings of an unwitting fool. The doctors initiated the experiment on Ju-yeon. As he sharply recalled, the moment he regained consciousness felt surreal. When he opened his eyes, an unbearable headache throbbed in his skull, accompanied by nausea and dizziness. His body felt strangely warm, as if something foreign coursed through his veins. A team of doctors surrounded him, their faces lighting up with relief and excitement. They cheerfully welcomed him back, marking the beginning of something monumental. Despite his disorientation, their words echoed in his ears. They told him to inform them if anything felt strange, if he experienced any discomfort. The following days felt like a scripted routine. The doctors encouraged him to walk naturally, carefully observing each step to ensure his movements were fluid. They trained him to speak with confidence, to pronounce words with precision. Even something as simple as smiling was taught to him, as if they were reconstructing his very existence from the ground up. Eating, too, was something he had to relearn. It wasn't just recovery, it was as if he were being rebuilt, piece by piece. One afternoon, as he sat eating lunch, the murmur of a television caught his attention. His ears perked up at the voices of news anchors reporting on an astonishing breakthrough. Brain-dead individuals had been revived through the implantation of a chip. The words sent a chill down his spine. Everything clicked into place. The reason for his reconstruction, the forced training, the unnatural warmth in his body, he was no longer just human. A computer chip had been implanted inside him. Back in the present at the research lab, investigators and Seo were left in shock after discovering the chip embedded in Ju-yeon's brain. Seo, still in disbelief, insisted that it must have been the seed of Yggdrasil. However, Min Do-han realized they had been mistaken all along. The implications were unsettling, but if they had managed to replicate the seed, his gaze fixated on Ju-yeon's unconscious body. He made his decision. They had to bring Ju-yeon back. Turning to his team, he asked if the necessary power supply was ready. Upon confirmation that it was fully charged, he immediately began preparations for sending the signal. Meanwhile, deep within Ju-yeon's buried memories, during a rehabilitation process, he found himself running on a treadmill when a senior doctor approached. With a calm but firm voice, the doctor informed him that it was time for the final test. If he passed, he could leave this place. A flicker of hope ignited in Ju-yeon's eyes as he asked whether that meant he could see his parents again. The doctor assured him with a smile, promising that his parents would be happy to see him healthy. Hearing that, Ju-yeon couldn't help but smile brightly. The doctor gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder, urging him to do his best, before leading him toward a room filled with towering machinery. Inside, a team of researchers carefully guided Ju-yeon to a seat, securing a helmet onto his head. Ju-yeon's gaze drifted toward a massive glass containment tool positioned in front of him. Something strange was inside. Curious, he inquired about it. The doctor hesitated for a moment before vaguely referring to it as a sleeping god, explaining that today they would awaken it, and in doing so, they would become gods themselves. At his signal, another researcher took position. But before Ju-yeon could ask more, the doctor diverted his attention, casually asking what he wanted to do once he woke up. Without hesitation, Ju-yeon answered. He wanted to go to the sea with his parents. The doctor smiled, reassuring him that his wish would come true. Then, with a press of the red button, a searing pain shot through Ju-yeon's entire body. Agonizing electric shocks surged through him, causing him to cry out in unbearable pain. Back in the present, Seo and Min Do-han watched as Ju-yeon's body trembled violently. Seo's eyes widened with concern, but Min Do-han remained composed. With a knowing expression, he spoke about how the truth is divided into 3 stages. The truth is based on experience. The truth is reconstructed by memory. And the truth that is mixed with lies, making it almost impossible to discern what is real. Ju-yeon's body was now drenched in sweat, his breathing ragged. Min Do-han observed him closely and determined that he must dig even deeper. Reaching out, he placed a firm finger against Ju-yeon's forehead. At that moment, Ju-yeon's eyes snapped open. A surge of energy pulsed through his mind, shattering his fragmented memories like broken glass. Inside his subconscious, chaos erupted within a stormy mental sea. From the clouds above, colossal fingers descended, reaching toward the depths where the hidden truth lay buried. Min Do-hoon's finger stretched toward the sky, piercing through the layers of Ju-yeon's memories. It reached the elementary school classroom where Ju-yeon once lied about going to the sea. Another finger emerged at the site of the machinery room where Ju-yeon had been brought for the final test, shattering the structure around it. Controlling the unfolding scene, Min Do-hoon commanded the hidden entity to reveal itself. Finally, his finger broke through the ceiling, reaching the room where the seed of Yggdrasil clashed with the doctor. The seed guy plucked one of the doctor's eyes, savoring the moment as the man collapsed in agony. A sinister grin spread across its face, enjoying the suffering it inflicted. Before it could reveal any further, something forcefully slammed into it. The seed guy turned, eyes narrowing at the sight of a massive, scallop-like finger crushing its own. Back in the lab, Min Do-hoon winced in pain, the connection taking a toll on his body. Seo tensed, but he pushed forward, ordering the team to proceed with the plan. The investigator, speaking through a wireless link, relayed instructions to the machine team, authorizing them to begin. If they could stop that entity now, sacrificing 10% of Korea's power supply was a price worth paying. Struggling against the immense strain, Min Do-hoon's presence loomed before the seed guy, who smirked in amusement. It posed a question, musing about the peak of human desire. Was it money, love, or success? Stepping forward, it reached the fractured glass tube, its eyes gleaming with eerie delight. With a twisted smile, it answered its own question. Guilt, fear, frustration, inferiority, defeatism. These, it claimed, were the most potent desires. Based on such desires, it would ascend beyond mortality, becoming the god of a new world. Its form shifted, grotesque and monstrous, a beast emerging from within, the only eternal god. In the lab, Min Do-hoon gritted his teeth, pushing beyond his limits. He funneled 10% more power into the system and raised the gun of truth to his forehead. Those who tamper with the desires of others, he declared, are those who cannot stand on their own. The seed of Yggdrasil let out a cry of agony, clutching its eye as the gun of truth took effect. It snarled, calling Min Do-hoon's words nonsense. Ju-yeon, stepping forward with unwavering fury, refused to be consumed any longer. His voice rang out with defiance, commanding the seed to leave his mind. Min Do-hoon's electrified finger surged forward, demanding the entity's true form to be revealed. This time, the seed of Yggdrasil was unable to resist, its essence forcibly extracted from Ju-yeon's mind. Min Do-hoon carefully picked the fragment between his fingers, studying it intently, saying the seed had to listen now. The other investigators stared in astonishment. The fragment was so small, almost as if it had been split. Min Do-hoon narrowed his eyes. Someone had interfered. Ju-yeon slowly regained consciousness, his breath unsteady. Seo and Min Do-hoon watched in surprise as he blinked, his expression filled with confusion. Weakness washed over him, and the first words that escaped his lips were a hesitant question. Had he killed someone? Min Do-hoon quickly stepped in, trying to ease the situation. He reassured Ju-yeon, explaining that most of the strange memories he had seen were merely fabrications, implanted by that entity. Still, doubt lingered in Ju-yeon's mind. He struggled to separate truth from deception, his thoughts clouded. Min Do-hoon, holding the seed of Yggdrasil carefully in his palm, glanced at the writhing mass. Only this snot-like thing and the ones who implanted it would know the real truth. Before they could dwell further, a researcher rushed in with urgency. The power supply was depleting fast. They needed to act immediately. Min Do-hoon turned back to Ju-yeon, his voice serious. The simplest solution was to eliminate the seed of Yggdrasil completely. But doing so carried a grave risk. Ju-yeon could fall into a brain-dead state again. The alternative was to reintegrate the seed, but this time, Ju-yeon would be the one in control. The choice was his alone. Min Do-hoon wouldn't force him. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, Ju-yeon's voice rang out, clear and resolute as he asked for it. Min Do-hoon hesitated, confused by Ju-yeon's sudden request. Ju-yeon extended his hand, palm open. His gaze was firm. It had come out of his head, so it was his to take. Carefully, Min Do-hoon placed the seed of Yggdrasil into his hand. Ju-yeon lifted it between his fingers, his grip tightening. His eyes burned with fury. This thing had tormented him, twisted his mind, made him suffer endlessly. It was nothing more than a conniving parasite. With unwavering determination, Ju Yon met their gazes. He had no intention of dying. He demanded to know the procedure, how to take control of the seed. The seed of Yggdrasil, ancient relics deeply intertwined with the very creation of the world. Throughout human history, whenever a seed sprouted, history itself was reshaped. Those chosen by the seed became keyholders, individuals who held the power to determine the course of the world's future. But there existed a group that refused to leave such power to fate. Someone had intercepted one of these seeds. Unlike those who revered it as a divine relic, they saw it as something they could recreate, manipulate, and control. Their belief was simple: if this was a relic, then they, too, could manufacture one. Through countless experiments, endless modifications, and careful manipulation, they finally succeeded. No longer would the seed choose its keyholder. Instead, they would choose. By fusing the transcendent power of the relic with controllable scientific technology, they created something new, Ju Yon, and now he was in the hands of Scallop Quarter. For them, his education and protection were of the highest priority. He was not merely an experiment, but a force that could shape the very future of the world. However, within the research facility, not everyone agreed. Many researchers were unsettled, questioning why they were keeping him alive despite the dangers he posed. Yet, among them, a woman stood apart. With a sinister glint in her eyes, she observed the situation with unsettling excitement, a smile across her lips. The next day, Ju Yon noticed someone in a strange outfit, resembling that of a spaceman. The person appeared overly excited to see him, leaving Ju Yon confused about their identity. Upon asking, he learned that the person in the unusual outfit was the chief researcher, Song Xianmai. She introduced herself, explaining that she would be responsible for both his body and mind, addressing him as YouTube Man. The bizarre nickname left Ju Yon baffled, and before he could question further, she eagerly explained that it was inspired by a YouTube man who downloaded videos to defeat villains. Without giving him time to process, she bombarded him with questions about the mechanism of his ability, asking how he downloaded information into his brain and how it functioned. The rapid questioning left Ju Yon even more confused. Min Du-han then entered the room, immediately noticing Xianmai's strange attire. He commented that Ju Yon was not a zombie, so there was no need to dress like she was auditioning for a low-budget horror film. Xianmai, unfazed as ever, simply shrugged, while Min Du-han turned to Ju Yon, stating that this place was full of lunatics. Xianmai, appearing slightly puzzled, stopped him, insisting that he should not ruin her image. Min Du-han smirked and teasingly asked what image she was referring to, the image of a mad scientist or that of a two-faced torturer. With full confidence, she responded that she was the one who had put the seed back into Ju Yon's head. No one else could perform such a task. People referred to her as the Upart scientist, though she mockingly admitted that it sounded more like a failed superhero name than something respectable. After the lighthearted banter, she shifted to the main topic, reminding Ju Yon that he had asked to learn how to control the seed. Ju Yon affirmed that he did not want to die as there were still too many mysteries in life to uncover. Xianmai then began the process, starting with teaching him how to turn the seed off and on, as well as how to nurture it properly. Min Du-han, bringing the conversation back to serious matters, stated that the introductions were over. To commemorate the moment, he handed Ju Yon a small chip, mentioning that the ones who had tampered with his mind and erased his memories must have left behind traces. Examining the chip closely, Ju Yon noticed the words Neo Connecting written on it. Meanwhile, somewhere in an auditorium, a senior doctor named Jin Yoon-tak stood on stage, delivering a speech. He spoke of space engineering, brain science, robotics, and AI, fields in which his expertise extended without limit. When an audience member asked about his next move, he smiled and revealed that he had come up with one goal: to merge everything he had researched into a singular creation. He boldly declared his ambition to design a human beyond human, an entity capable of walking with legs superior to those of ordinary humans, possessing an even greater lung capacity, and an intelligence that far surpassed human limits, might as well be using dial-up brains. A wave of shock rippled through the audience, leading to a flurry of questions. However, he ended the speech abruptly, saying nothing more for the day. As he exited the stage, his assistant approached him, informing him about a vessel they had discovered. Upon hearing this, Jin Yoon-tak let out a sinister laugh. 1 month later, Xianmai arrived at Ju Yon's door, reminding him that he was to start school that day. Receiving no reply, she entered the room. His room resembled a garbage dump. cluttered with empty snack packets and food leftovers. Ju-yeon sat slumped in a chair, claiming that he had watched far too much YouTube. Checking his watch history, 432 hours of screen time for the month, an achievement that probably deserved a medal. As Ju-yeon turned back toward her, he complained that his head now felt dizzy. A man stood at a small food stall, carefully preparing sweet stick fruits. With practiced hands, he peeled the fruit, skewered it onto a stick, and then dipped it into a thick layer of sugary syrup. The glossy coating hardened almost instantly, leaving behind a glistening treat of double-layered sweetness. He handed one to a man standing near Seon-mai, who accepted it with delight. As he took the stick, he turned to Seon-mai, asking for her opinion on the taste. She responded enthusiastically, calling it delicious. Taking a bite himself, he savored the flavor, feeling a deep satisfaction wash over him. The layered sweetness overwhelmed his senses, making him wonder if a simple combination of sugar and fruit could create such an incredible taste. What would it be like for someone with two brains to experience it? His cryptic remark left Seon-mai confused, and she remained lost in his own thoughts, staring at the sweet stick in his hand. At the Scallop headquarters, Min Do-han sat in front of multiple screens, engaged in a video conference with 3 individuals. The tension in the air was palpable. One of the men on screen questioned how Min Do-han thought he could hide Ju-yeon forever. With a pointless smile, Min Do-han responded that he had never really intended to hide him. Another man, his expression stern, demanded proof regarding the alleged use of 10% of South Korea's total power supply. Min Do-han remained unfazed, though the accusation was clearly serious. Realizing what had happened, the man sneered, wondering if wasting that much energy just to run his mouth was this idiot's only real talent. Min Do-han, without hesitation, confirmed it, emphasizing that it concerned the keyholder's past. The other man, his patience thinning, mockingly asked him to elaborate. Min Do-han explained that, surprisingly, the seed had shown a preference for Ju-yeon's body, even though it had not chosen him naturally. Instead, they had chosen Ju-yeon for it. The man spoke up again, sneering that he loathed cryptic, roundabout nonsense. Holding up pictures of Ju-yeon, he remarked that the boy looked about as impressive as a soggy piece of bread. Min Do-han, however, disagreed, noting that Ju-yeon had potential and an affinity for undergoing transformation. One of the men then issued a reminder. Investments in keyholder candidates were only made if they met a certain level of capability. They had already dispatched their own team to judge Ju-yeon for themselves. Elite special forces, trained specifically to handle superhuman threats, were en route to assess him firsthand. Before the meeting ended, another man made an unsettling announcement. The number of missing persons cases had been rising, and a peculiar pattern had emerged. All of the missing individuals were brain-dead patients. The strange nature of the case left an eerie silence in the room. As the screens went dark, Min Do-han leaned back in disappointment, his mind already working through the implications. Suspicions formed, but there was no concrete proof yet. Just then, Seon-mai appeared at the door, informing him that Ju-yeon had gone to school. Finally, Ju-yeon was returning to school, but this time, the burden felt lighter. With a featherlight bag slung over his shoulder, he strolled effortlessly, almost satisfied that it wasn't the usual 32 kilograms monster, while listening to music. Rubbing his eyes, he was surprised to see that the usual floating videos no longer appeared before him. For the first time in a while, everything seemed normal. However, his moment of peace was short-lived. Something felt off. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a group of muscular men approaching. The sight made him uneasy, and as they drew closer, his suspicion turned into alarm. Within seconds, they had surrounded him. A sense of fear crept up his spine. He hesitantly asked if they had some business with him, but the men remained silent. His mind raced. Just then, a thought surfaced. Seon-mai had warned him that someone might target him. Recalling her lectures, he quickly tried to remember what he had been taught to do in such a situation. Based on experiments, Ju-yeon's sole desire had always been YouTube. Instead of running or avoiding danger, he needed to harness that desire and use it to become stronger. There was only one thing the seed required: to be fed. If he wanted to master it, the fastest way was to satisfy its hunger. And when the time came to use its power, he simply needed a convincing reason. Snapping back to reality, he realized that the moment for that convincing reason had arrived. He recalled Seon-mai's example when faced with danger. The primal human instinct for safety could serve as a valid desire for both him and the seed. Confront it with all his might, that was her instruction. Determined, he steeled himself and decided to act just as he had been trained. Closing his eyes, he initiated symbiosis with a seed. In an instant, he found himself surrounded by countless floating screens, the digital space stretching infinitely before him. The sweet stick fruit tumbled to the ground, rolling slightly. The men surrounding Ju-yeon were no ordinary group. They were the Special Task Force, an elite unit assigned to the most dangerous missions, including counterterrorism, VIP protection, high-profile arrests, and special disaster rescue operations. Among them stood an even more specialized unit, one selected purely for their combat prowess, the Anti-Superhuman Special Task Force, known as the Horn Unit. To them, dealing with a single high school student was less of a challenge and more of a joke, like swatting away an annoying fly. One of them, exuding confidence, scoffed as he kicked the fallen sweet stick fruit, sending it flying toward Ju-yeon with force. But easy missions had a way of turning into sweat-drenched nightmares. Before the fruit stick could even reach him, Seo had appeared right in front of him, snatching it midair. Ju-yeon stood frozen for a moment, shocked by her sudden arrival. As he processed the situation, Seo, gripping the fruit stick tightly, smirked and remarked, now was the perfect time to see how well his training worked in real combat. Earlier, back in the training room, Seon-mai and Seo analyzed Ju-yeon's progress. Seon-mai explained that YouTube allowed him to follow videos, which was simple and expected. However, Seo pointed out that the real significance wasn't just that he could follow them, but how he did it, and to what extent he could utilize those skills. Seon-mai agreed, acknowledging that by introducing just one formula, endless possibilities could be unlocked, something she found extremely thrilling. Now, back in the fight, Ju-yeon pressed his hand against the ground, lowering himself as if preparing to flee. The Horn Unit scoffed at the sight, mocking his seemingly desperate attempt to escape. However, in the next moment, he launched himself into the air, twisting mid-flight and delivering a brutal double kick to one of the men's face. The sheer force shattered teeth on impact, leaving him in urgent need of a straw for all future meals. And the very next moment, he was sent flying and landed on the ground. The other two men recoiled in horror, realizing that this was nothing like the simple mission they had expected. Ju-yeon's eyes gleamed as he glared at them, making it clear they had attacked first, so they had no one to blame but themselves. Before they could react, one of the polished potato lunged from behind, attempting to catch him off guard. In an instant, Ju-yeon spun around, countering with a sharp kick to the attacker's face. The man staggered back, clutching his cheek in pain while cursing under his breath. Raising one leg high, Ju-yeon mimicked the movements of Jeet Kyun-do, further provoking his opponent. Enraged, the man retaliated with a flurry of punches, but Ju-yeon effortlessly dodged each one, his body moving with precision. Frustration boiled over as the attacker sneered, accusing him of nothing more than running like a rat. That remark struck a nerve. Ju-yeon clenched his fist, pivoted, and delivered a powerful punch directly to the man's back. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping, sweat dripping from his brow, and saliva escaping his mouth. A chilling realization dawned upon him. Ju-yeon wasn't just copying moves, he understood boxing. Before he could recover, Ju-yeon followed up with a devastating final punch, sending him crashing to the ground with a deafening thud, his body sprawled in a miserable heap. Ju-yeon wiped his face, glancing at the fallen men before realizing he still had to get to school. It had been a while, and he didn't want to be late. No matter how skilled the Special Task Force was, witnessing something like this firsthand caused their bodies to freeze in shock. Seo observed the last remaining soldier, analyzing his hesitance. The choice left to him was clear: even if he continued to fight, he would inevitably face the same fate as the others. However, the last man refused to accept defeat at the hands of a mere high school student. It was against his very limited brain capacity. He pulled out a knife. With a desperate lunge, he slashed toward Ju-yeon, who effortlessly sidestepped the attack. The only mark left was a faint scratch on his cheek. Touching his cheek, Ju-yeon sighed. They were all the same, mindlessly charging in, attacking without strategy. But he had decided not to care about that anymore. His eyes gleamed as he made his stance clear: if they messed with him, he wouldn't stand still. With that, he lunged forward, channeling all his strength into a single strike. The force of his slap was so powerful that it visibly disfigured the man's face, sending him tumbling. As the scene unfolded, Seon-mai's lecture echoed in Ju-yeon's mind, step by step. He was learning to refine and control his ability. Standing amidst the fallen soldiers, he realized something he had found: Overcome with excitement, he struck a victorious dab pose, celebrating his newfound triumph. Meanwhile, a muscular figure casually snacked on a sweet fruit stick, having observed the entire battle. A mocking chuckle escaped him as he murmured under his breath, "A defective product." Standing across the road, the man watched as Ju-yeon celebrated his victory. Without hesitation, he pulled out a device and swiftly drafted a retrieval report. He labeled Ju-yeon as a defective product, noting his name, location, and ability, copycat. Meanwhile, unaware of the looming danger, Ju-yeon continued his walk to school with Seo. At school, Jisu's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing Ju-yeon after so long. She called out his name, amazed that he was back. Her reaction made Ju-yeon feel warm inside. She remembered him. Unlike the others, who seemed to have forgotten he was even in their class. As she looked at his arms, noticing the veins and defined muscles, the flirty girl couldn't help but be impressed, like she had just discovered her new favorite pastime. She commented on how he had been working out. Compliments like these weren't something he was used to. The dumb fool started to shy away, clearly not built to handle a little praise. The other students also murmured among themselves, surprised to see him back. For them, it was as if Ju-yeon had completely vanished before his return today. Just then, Seo appeared, interrupting the moment. She told him not to make a fuss and reminded him about his report. Ju-yeon nodded, acknowledging her words. Jisoo, however, found herself growing jealous. The way they interacted made her wonder how they were so close. She wondered whether they met outside of school, especially since Seo had also missed a lot of classes recently. In another classroom, Ju-yeon sat reporting to Min Do-hoon and Seon Mai about his recent encounter. He mentioned that, as expected, there had been an incident on the way to school. Seon Mai listened carefully before asking how he felt about being back after so long. Ju-yeon took a moment to think. He admitted that before, he had always been hiding, but now it felt different. Outside, Seo remained on duty, keeping an eye on any students passing by, ensuring that nothing suspicious happened. Min Do-hoon leaned back in his chair as Seon Mai warned Ju-yeon to be careful. He nodded in response. Before Ju-yeon could leave, Min Do-hoon reminded him to visit the teacher's office, as there were things he needed to correct in person. After a while, inside the teacher's office, Ju-yeon sat across from his teacher, listening in shock. The teacher informed him that he was now receiving support from the Scholarship Foundation. He added that Ju-yeon's grades were average, and that he was always quiet, making him wonder if Ju-yeon was adapting well to school. As Ju-yeon processed the information, the teacher continued, mentioning that the foundation had described him as a highly talented individual. Because of that, the school would fully support him from now on. If he ever faced any discomfort, he was encouraged to inform them. Handing Ju-yeon a file, the teacher revealed that the foundation's representative had made a special request. Now, he had the authority to make changes to his life record documents. Ju-yeon took the pen and, with a quiet hesitation, made the necessary changes. Soon after, he stood up, bowed his head respectfully, and expressed his gratitude before leaving the office. Just as he exited, the teacher's gaze fell on the document, where Ju-yeon had altered one significant detail. Under the section listing his parents, he had removed the word deceased and replaced it with searching. Back at headquarters, Seon Mai sat, staring at Min Do-hoon with amazement, at his decision to send Ju-yeon back to school. She speculated that it was some kind of camouflage tactic, sending Ju-yeon to school in exchange for making him work even harder. Min Do-hoon, however, denied her assumptions. He simply stated that, no matter how extraordinary someone was, they were still a student at heart. School had its own restrictions, but there were certain things that couldn't be denied to Ju-yeon, things he should naturally be able to enjoy. That was his answer to Ju-yeon, the boy who once said he wanted to live a normal life. Seon Mai, eyes filled with surprise, leaned back and muttered to herself. Meeting some of the most unnatural beings in the world and still seeking something as ordinary as school, his predecessor truly was. Before she could finish her thought, Min Do-hoon casually raised his hand, dismissing the conversation, and left the room. Elsewhere, inside the Neo-connecting building, Dr. Yoon-tak sat in his office, reviewing a newly delivered report. His eyes glimmered with interest as he skimmed through the details. It was the report on the so-called defective product, Ju-yeon. A moment later, he picked up his phone and made a call. His voice carried a hint of amusement as he spoke, claiming that nothing could escape his eyes. He was pleased. After all this time, he had finally found him. On the other end of the call, a man standing near several motionless bodies reported that Ju Yeon had come into contact with the scallops. He couldn't just stand by and watch any longer. Dr. Yoon-tak asked if he could handle the situation alone. The man, gritting his teeth, demanded repayment for everything he had endured on his own. At first, he had been willing to let it go if Ju Yeon had remained hidden quietly. But now, that was no longer an option. With a sneer, he cursed under his breath and called Ju Yeon an ungrateful monkey. The battle has begun. Stay tuned to see if Ju Yeon will rise as an unstoppable force or be dragged into the abyss by those hunting him. Comment Noah YouTube if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.